My name is Rebecca, and I'm 45 years old. For over a decade, I was the backbone of Ashford Industries' IT infrastructure in Charlotte, North Carolina. You wouldn't know it from the company website or quarterly reports, but I built the tech division from the ground up, starting when they were still using Windows XP and keeping passwords on sticky notes taped to monitors. What began as a tiny 5-person help desk turned into a 30-person team that kept 4 manufacturing plants running around the clock. I hadn't even meant to stay there that long. After my divorce, I'd taken the job as a stopgap, something to keep my mind occupied while I figured out the next chapter of my life. But I turned out to be good at it, very good. And somewhere along the way, those servers, networks, and systems became mine. Not in a legal sense, but in a way that mattered. So when our CEO, Michael Bennett, invited me to lunch at Hawthorne Grill, the kind of place with leather booths and waiters in starched shirts, you'd think I would have been blindsided. But I wasn't. Michael cut into his filet mignon, smiled that corporate smile, and said, "Rebecca, you've been invaluable. But the board feels we need a fresh perspective, someone with a vision for where technology is going." Translation? They found someone younger, cheaper, and more compliant. His name was Trevor, the owner's nephew, fresh out of Stanford with a master's in digital transformation. I smiled politely and took a sip of iced tea. "Who's handling the transition?" I asked. Michael looked relieved I wasn't making a scene. "You'll have 6 weeks. We'll announce it at the next all-hands meeting." He slid an NDA across the table before dessert even arrived. I signed it, shook his hand, told him I understood that business was business. But back at my desk, I saw the truth. My admin credentials were already downgraded, and I was gone from the leadership email thread. This decision had been made long before lunch. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because of fear about finding another job, and not even because of anger, though there was plenty of that. What kept me up was something I'd noticed in the server logs 3 months earlier. Small, unauthorized access attempts from an IP address tied to the executive floor. Someone had been quietly poking through my documentation, my security protocols, my contingency plans. They weren't just replacing me, they were extracting everything I knew before kicking me to the curb. I'd come to Charlotte 17 years earlier, following my then-husband, Eric, who'd landed a job at a local university. We were young and ambitious, and I figured I'd find my own path. When the divorce papers landed on our kitchen counter after 7 years of marriage, it came out of nowhere. "We want different things," he'd said. No fights, no warnings, just done. When Ashford hired me, I was crashing on my sister's couch, rebuilding my life while they were rebuilding their network after a ransomware attack. It was supposed to be temporary, but I saw the potential. The Ashford team understood machinery, but they were lost when it came to technology. Millions of dollars worth of equipment, hundreds of jobs, running on systems one hiccup away from collapse. I pitched Michael a 5-year overhaul, and he surprised me by saying yes. For 3 years, I hardly saw daylight. I built redundancies, trained staff, created fail-safes. When the East Coast blackout hit, we were the only plant in the region still humming. Suddenly, I was getting invited to board meetings. My budget tripled. I hired people like Kayla, who became my right hand, and Marcus, who could troubleshoot his way out of anything. We weren't just IT anymore, we were the backbone of Ashford's operations. At the 2019 holiday party, the owner himself shook my hand and said, "We couldn't have expanded without your systems." I thought I'd found a place where I mattered. But the cracks started showing last summer. A consultant showed up unannounced to audit our infrastructure, asking basic questions about systems I'd personally designed. When I asked who authorized the audit, he mumbled something about the executive team and changed the subject. Then my access to board minutes vanished from the shared drive. Explanation? Server cleanup. In December, Michael started canceling our weekly briefings, always with a reasonable excuse. At the New Year's leadership retreat, I overheard the owner bragging about Trevor's upcoming graduation. "Brilliant kid," he said. "Tech companies are lining up for him." I should have paid more attention. The final clue came when Kayla told me about a strategic planning session she was invited to, one I normally would have led. When she mentioned my name, Michael brushed it off. "Something feels off," she'd said. "Loyal to a fault," my sister used to say. I brushed it off, too. 2 days after the lunch, I stood in the server room late at night, surrounded by the familiar hum of machinery. These machines had been my life for 11 years. I ran my hand along the edge of the main console, thinking about how I'd built this from scratch, through divorce, loneliness, and countless late nights. This was my space. When Trevor showed up at the door, expensive watch gleaming, confidence radiating, he said, "Just getting the lay of the land." I smiled. "Impressive setup," he said. "A little old school, but solid." That night, I texted Marcus, "Coffee at Sunrise Cafe, 6:30 a.m. Can you meet?" By the next morning, I had a plan. Because they thought they were pushing out a relic, but they were about to learn that experience isn't just something you replace. It's something you underestimate at your own risk. For 3 years, I hardly saw daylight. I rebuilt every network at Ashford Industries, trained the staff, and created backups and failsafes that could survive almost anything. When the East Coast blackout hit, our Charlotte plant was the only one in the region that stayed online. The board noticed. Michael, the CEO, began inviting me to meetings. My budget tripled overnight. I built a team, great people like Kayla, who became my right hand, and Marcus, a brilliant coder who could untangle any technical knot. We weren't just the IT department anymore. We were the reason Ashford could promise clients they'd never miss a shipment, no matter what. At the company holiday party in 2019, Charles Ashford, the majority owner, shook my hand and said, "Rebecca, you've turned us into a modern operation. We couldn't have scaled up without your systems." For the first time in years, I thought I'd found my place, somewhere I truly mattered. The first crack showed up last September. A consultant appeared unannounced to audit our digital infrastructure. He asked basic questions about systems I had designed myself. When I pressed him on who approved the audit, he vaguely referenced the executive team and quickly changed the subject. A week later, I noticed I no longer had access to the board meeting minutes on the shared drive. "Server cleanup," read the explanation. December came, and Michael began canceling our weekly briefings, always with some polite excuse. At the New Year leadership retreat, I overheard Charles talking about his nephew, Trevor, finishing his master's at Stanford. "Brilliant with computers," he bragged. "Tech companies are lining up for him." At the time, I didn't think much of it. Looking back, I should have. The final red flag came when Kayla pulled me aside to tell me about a strategic planning session she'd been invited to, the kind of meeting I normally led. When she mentioned my name, Michael had swiftly changed the subject. "Something's off," she told me quietly. "Loyal to a fault," my ex-husband once said about me. And true to form, I brushed it off. 2 days after that fateful lunch, I found myself standing alone in the server room at 7 p.m., long after everyone else had gone home. The soft hum of machines filled the space, a sound that had always calmed me. I ran my hand along the edge of the main console, feeling the familiar buzz under my fingertips. 11 years of my life lived behind these walls, hidden in blinking lights and humming fans. I was working late when I heard footsteps. Turning, I saw Trevor Ashford standing in the doorway, clean-cut, an expensive watch on his wrist, and a confidence that only comes with youth and family privilege. He couldn't have been older than 30. "Just doing some routine checks," I said casually. "Need something?" "Just getting the lay of the land," he replied smoothly, stepping inside like he already owned the place. "Michael mentioned you'd be showing me around soon." "Did he?" I said, keeping my voice neutral. Trevor scanned the server racks. "Impressive setup. Bit old school, but solid." Old school. I'd upgraded those systems only 8 months ago. "Your documentation is thorough," he added, almost like a compliment. "I've been going through your protocols." I've got some ideas for modernization. He said it like he was doing me a favor. Looking forward to hearing them, I replied, though the words tasted like chalk in my mouth. After he left, I sat at my workstation and pulled up the access logs. Sure enough, Trevor's credentials had been created 3 weeks before my lunch with Michael. He already had top-level admin access and had combed through my entire documentation library. I reached for my phone and texted Marcus, "Can you meet before work tomorrow? Sunrise Cafe, 6:30. That night, I drove to the lake where Eric and I used to sit and watch the sunset. The winter sky stretched black over the water. I remembered the day Michael promoted me to director. "You're the backbone of this place," he had said. Turns out, backbones can be replaced. Marcus was already at the Sunrise Cafe when I arrived the next morning, a half-empty coffee cup in front of him and dark circles under his eyes. He looked up the moment I walked in. He knew something was wrong. "They're phasing me out," I said, sliding into the booth across from him without bothering with small talk. Marcus nodded slowly. "I figured. They've been asking me weird questions, having me explain your systems like they're prepping someone new." "When did it start?" I asked. "A couple of weeks ago," he said softly, eyes dropping to his coffee. "I'm sorry, Rebecca. I should have told you." I shook my head. "You've got a family, a mortgage. I don't blame you." He took a long breath. "What's your plan?" I hadn't fully realized I had one until he asked. But sitting there, watching the early morning commuters shuffle past the window, something clicked inside me, a clarity I hadn't felt since the day Eric left, when I found the divorce papers on the kitchen counter. "They think everything's in the documentation," I murmured. "But we both know it's not." Marcus leaned forward. "The proprietary tools. The workarounds." I nodded. "The patches I built that aren't in any manual. The custom monitoring systems. The vendor integrations no one else fully understands." "Rebecca, you're not sabotaging anything, are you?" he asked cautiously. "No," I said firmly. "But I'm not going to hand over what's mine without a fight." Marcus studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. He understood. "I need copies of everything I personally developed," I told him quietly. "And I need to know who's still loyal." The official announcement came at the all-hands meeting the following week. Michael stood at the front of the room, all smiles and polished words, with Trevor right beside him, looking every bit the golden boy. "Rebecca has been instrumental in building Ashford's IT infrastructure," Michael said smoothly, not once making eye contact with me. "We're deeply grateful for her contributions as she helps transition Trevor into his new leadership role over the next 6 weeks." Murmurs rippled through the room. The IT team looked stunned. Kayla's eyes found mine across the rows of chairs, full of unspoken questions. I gave her the faintest nod. After the meeting, I asked for a sit-down with Michael and HR. In the conference room, Diane from HR slid a document across the table, her tone practiced. "Anything developed during your tenure here is company property." "Not everything," I countered, tapping the table. "The vendor sync interface was developed before I joined Ashford. I licensed it to the company, but I retained ownership. It's all in the original agreement." Michael shifted in his chair. "That was 10 years ago, Rebecca. The company has evolved. So has your system. Every update, every integration," I said calmly, "was built on my original code." I leaned forward, eyes steady. "I'm not trying to be difficult. I just want fair compensation for my intellectual property." Michael and Diane exchanged glances. "We'll look into it," he said finally. I knew that look. They were stalling. The next morning, I found my access to the development servers restricted. Security protocol during transition periods, the automated email read. That afternoon, Trevor called a team meeting and didn't invite me. I showed up anyway, standing in the doorway as he clicked through slides. "Rebecca," Trevor said with a tight smile, "glad you could join us. We were just discussing some changes to the network architecture." I crossed my arms. "Which architecture specifically?" "The main production floor systems," he said confidently. We're going to streamline the protocols. I smiled thinly. Those protocols are the reason the line doesn't fail under heavy load. Trevor's smile flickered, but he pressed on. Modern systems don't need such complicated workarounds. He said it like he was the future. But what he didn't understand, not yet, was that the future was still very much tied to me. Those aren't workarounds, Kayla interjected firmly. They're necessary adaptations for our equipment. Rebecca designed them after the 2018 failure. The room fell silent. For a moment, Trevor's confidence flickered, his polished facade slipping just slightly. Then he cleared his throat. Well, I appreciate the historical perspective, but we're moving forward with the streamlining. He turned his back to the room and started scribbling on the whiteboard, effectively dismissing me. Later that day, I received an email from legal. Ashford Industries was asserting full ownership over all systems, including the vendor sync interface I had developed. They cited a vague clause about integrated technologies becoming company property. Attached to the email was an offer, a $5,000 technology acquisition bonus. But the real blow came the next day. I learned that Trevor had scheduled one-on-one meetings with every member of my team, and these weren't transition check-ins. They were full-blown performance evaluations. He was sizing up who to keep and who to cut. Marcus texted me after his meeting. He asked if your systems were really necessary or if they were just overcomplicated. Fishing for something. Heads up. That night, I found an email from one of our suppliers in my personal account. They were confused about a new licensing agreement Ashford had sent them, one I knew nothing about. When I opened the document, my stomach turned. Michael had signed a deal transferring all my custom supplier integrations to a third-party vendor, a startup founded by Trevor's former classmate. They weren't just pushing me out. They were dismantling everything I'd built and selling it off. When I tried to log into the backup servers to retrieve my original code, my credentials had already been revoked. The message on the screen was cold and final. Game on. I needed leverage, and fast. Ashford hadn't just been sloppy. They'd been calculating, quietly setting this up for months. The timeline came into focus. Trevor had been brought in not just to replace me, but to mine everything I knew, drain the value, and leave me behind. That night, I called Darren Phillips, a network security specialist I'd worked with years ago when we survived a massive cyber attack together. We met at a highway diner, the kind of place Michael and the Ashford execs would never bother to notice. Legally, you're in a tight corner, Darren said after I laid everything out. But there's something odd here. Why now? The company's doing well, right? That's what I can't figure out, I admitted, sipping lukewarm coffee. Let me poke around, he offered. Just basic info gathering, nothing invasive. 2 days later, my phone buzzed at 11 p.m. Darren's voice was low but urgent. Rebecca, you need to see this. He'd found it. SEC filings showing Ashford Industries was deep in acquisition talks. TechCore Manufacturing, a major conglomerate out of Boston, was in late-stage negotiations to buy them out. But the deal had conditions. Ashford had to demonstrate updated technical infrastructure and smooth transitional leadership. They're cleaning house to make the sale look better, Darren explained. And your systems? They're a centerpiece. The valuation specifically mentions the proprietary manufacturing management interface. My interface, I said quietly. The one I built from the ground up. There's more, Darren continued grimly. Charles Ashford cashed out most of his shares last quarter. This acquisition? It mainly benefits Michael and the other execs. Golden parachutes, cushy roles at TechCore. But the thing that hit me hardest wasn't the sale itself. It was the emails Darren uncovered, showing that Michael and Charles had been planning to replace me for over 6 months, back when I was pulling all-nighters to patch a critical security breach, when I thought we were a team. I sat alone in my living room that night, the glow of the laptop reflecting off the window. For the first time in weeks, my anger sharpened into clarity. They thought they could erase me. They were about to learn otherwise. While I'd been pulling all-nighters to patch a massive security breach, They'd been interviewing Trevor behind my back. That night, I drove to the old industrial park on the edge of Charlotte, the place where, years ago, I first sketched out the vendor sink architecture when it was nothing but an idea in my notebook. I sat in my car until dawn, watching the sky turn from black to gray over the rusted warehouses, their windows broken, their walls scarred by time. When I got home, I pulled an old external hard drive from the back of my closet, the one I'd nearly forgotten. My hands trembled a little as I plugged it in. There it was, the original vendor sync code, created before I'd ever joined Ashford Industries. The documentation was there, too clear, time-stamped records showing I'd begun developing it 8 months before Ashford hired me. And then, as if fate wanted to twist the knife, I found the emails. Michael's own messages from the early days, asking me to integrate my system with Ashford's operations. His words were unambiguous, his acknowledgement that it was my proprietary tool, his promise that we'd formalize ownership once things settled down. I had trusted him. Foolish me. The next morning, Trevor called me into a meeting with Michael and Diane from HR. "We're accelerating the transition," Michael said, not even bothering with a greeting. "Your last day will be next Friday." 2 weeks instead of 6, I noted, keeping my tone even. "Any particular reason?" "Trevor has demonstrated exceptional capability," Diane said smoothly, her voice polished with corporate detachment. "And frankly, Rebecca, your attitude hasn't been conducive to a smooth handover." I nodded slowly. "I see. We'll need you to complete all documentation and training by Wednesday," Trevor added, his voice a little too bright. "Of course," I replied steadily. "And the ownership of the vendor sync system? Have you had time to review the original agreements?" Michael's expression hardened. "Our legal team has determined that all integrated systems fall under company ownership. The separation package is generous, Rebecca. I suggest you take it." I rose from my chair. "I'll have my lawyer review everything." Michael's eyes narrowed. "Don't make this difficult, Rebecca. It won't change the outcome." As I walked out of the room, I pulled out my phone and texted Marcus. "Plan B tonight." 7 hours later, Marcus handed me a flash drive in the dimly lit parking lot of a grocery store. "Everything you asked for," he said quietly. "Original code bases, deployment logs, authentication keys." "Why are you helping me?" I asked. He looked me square in the eye. "Because they think we're all replaceable." I spent the weekend meticulously organizing every piece of evidence, the original vendor sync code, the emails with Michael, the licensing agreements, the dates proving my system predated Ashford. On Monday morning, I arrived early to the office and found Kayla already at her desk, her face pale, eyes ringed with exhaustion. "You heard about the accelerated timeline?" she asked. I nodded. "How's the team holding up?" "Not well. Trevor called emergency planning sessions all weekend, tried to reverse engineer your monitoring system." She lowered her voice. "It didn't go well. 3 alerts from the production floor were missed." "Anyone hurt?" I asked. "No, but they had to shut down line 3 for 4 hours. Cost the company around $40,000 and a day of lost production." I kept my face neutral. "Sorry to hear that." "Rebecca," she hesitated. "I think I'm next. Trevor's been asking if my role is really necessary." I had suspected as much. Kayla knew too much about how things really worked. "Do you trust me?" I asked quietly. She didn't hesitate. "Completely." I slid a sealed envelope across her desk. "If anything happens this week, anything unusual, open this. It explains everything." That afternoon, I met with 3 patent attorneys, paying rush fees to file provisional patents on the key components of my system, not the whole package, just the pieces that made it hum inside Ashford's aging equipment. The game was no longer about survival. It was about making sure they never forgot who really built this house. On Tuesday, I wrapped up every piece of transition documentation Trevor had requested. I attended his planning meeting, smiled politely, and answered every question like the model employee they wanted to parade around. But behind the scenes, Darren and I were busy. He helped me set up a secure off-site server, and by midnight, I had transferred all my original vendor sync code there. I also created a standalone version of the system that would run independently of Ashford Industries' infrastructure. Wednesday morning, I opened my personal email and froze for a second. There was a message from TechCore Manufacturing, the Boston conglomerate preparing to acquire Ashford. They wanted to discuss mutual business interests at their regional office. They'd heard I was leaving and were suddenly very interested in my expertise. I smiled to myself, forwarded the email to my attorney, and then picked up the phone to call TechCore's VP of Operations. We agreed to meet, after my official departure from Ashford, of course. That night, I executed the heart of my plan. Using the access credentials Marcus had quietly saved, I updated 3 critical components of the vendor sync system. I added a digital signature verification feature to flag unauthorized modifications. And most importantly, I updated the software license to expire in exactly 8 days, 1 day after my last official day at Ashford. It was all clean and above board. Nothing malicious. No sabotage. Just a legal, undeniable reminder that what was mine couldn't be taken without proper negotiation. Thursday, Trevor called me into his office. "Some of the team says you've been acting differently," he said, trying to sound casual but failing. "Just focused on wrapping everything up," I replied smoothly. He gave me a long, suspicious look. "We're changing all system passwords and access credentials tomorrow after you leave. Standard procedure." Of course, I nodded. Makes sense. Though that won't affect the core functionality of the vendor sync system. His brows lifted slightly. "Meaning?" "Just that the system's designed to work regardless of admin changes," I said lightly. "That's the beauty of it." I watched as he tried to figure out whether I was warning him or simply making conversation. He chose wrong. "I think we're good here," he said, waving me off. "Legal will meet with you tomorrow for final paperwork." As I left, I passed Michael in the hallway. He barely nodded, 11 years reduced to that one dismissive gesture. By midnight, everything was set. I sat at home and sent one final command to my private server. Verification sequence Alpha 7 complete. The countdown was live. Friday morning, I turned in my badge, signed the exit paperwork, and declined the farewell lunch Trevor had arranged, much to Michael's visible relief. As I walked to my car, Marcus called. "It's done," he said quietly. "Trevor changed all the admin passwords. They're doing a full system review this afternoon." "Thanks for the heads up," I said, keeping my voice calm. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we wait." I spent the weekend at home, ignoring the constant stream of calls from unknown numbers. I slept better than I had in months. Monday morning at precisely 9:17 a.m., as the production floor ramped up to peak operation, every instance of the vendor sync system across Ashford's 4 facilities displayed the same message. License expired. Please contact the developer to renew. By 9:20, the first production line ground to a halt. By 9:45, all 4 sites were offline. At 10:30, my phone rang. It was Michael. "What the hell did you do?" he barked, his voice cracking at the edges. "I didn't do anything," I replied evenly. "The software license expired." He tried to regain his bluster. "This is sabotage." "It's standard license management," I corrected calmly. "Check the original integration agreement from 11 years ago," I told Michael calmly. Clause 7 clearly states that Ashford was licensing the technology, not purchasing it. There was silence on the line. "I've already sent a formal licensing agreement to your legal department," I continued. "The terms are simple: formal recognition of my ownership, fair compensation for continued use, and a non-disclosure agreement covering the details of my departure." "That's extortion," Michael snapped. "That's business," I replied smoothly. "These things happen." By 3 p.m., Ashford's lawyers had reviewed all my documentation. By 5 p.m., the agreement was signed. 3 days later, I was sitting across from TechCore's Vice President of Operations in their sleek downtown office. He slid a contract across the polished table. "We're still acquiring Ashford," he said, watching me carefully, "but we want you to lead the technical integration as a consultant, not as an employee." The offer on the table doubled what Ashford had paid me. I'd have full control over my hours and work location. "And Trevor?" I asked, arching an eyebrow. The VP's face tightened slightly. "Mr. Ashford will be transitioning to other opportunities." I signed the contract that afternoon. 2 weeks later, Marcus called to tell me the official news. Trevor had been quietly removed from his position. The company line was that he had pursued other opportunities, but the real reason was clear. 3 of Ashford's biggest clients had threatened to pull their contracts after repeated system failures. Michael stayed on as CEO during the TechCore acquisition, but his role became largely ceremonial. No real authority, no real team, just a shiny title and an office well away from the decision-makers. Oddly, I didn't feel the rush of triumph I'd once imagined. What I felt was a quiet, steady certainty that I had done what was right. The next month, I used my first consulting check to put a down payment on a small cabin by Lake Norman. Nothing extravagant, just a peaceful place with a deck where I could watch the sun rise and set, hear the water lapping against the shore, and feel the weight of everything lift. Kayla joined my consulting team 3 months later. Then Marcus. Before long, nearly half of my old department had come over, not as employees, but as partners in a business that was ours to shape. About a year after everything happened, I ran into Michael at a restaurant downtown. He saw me, paused as if to walk away, then came over to my table. "You won," he said quietly. I looked at him, really looked. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his suit a little less crisp, his shoulders a little heavier. "It wasn't about winning," I replied, and I meant it. "It was about value, knowing what you're worth." He gave a small, weary nod, then walked away. I sat there a long time after, watching the city lights blink to life across the river, thinking about the systems we build, the ones we break, and the ones that, in the end, outlast us all.